This is my 152nd video on my work with OO gauge. See part 1 of this series for my reasons for getting into OO gauge when I already had a lot invested in working in N gauge and I didn't really have space available for a large, fully operational OO gauge layout. Also see my series on my N gauge railway modelling for smaller and more complex scenery and smaller scale trains running. This part is about a rather unusual, I guess you could even say unique, breakdown train set that I bought on eBay UK. The set was marked as a British Railways breakdown crane. My prototype for OO gauge modelling is LMS operations before World War II, so I rebadged the set as an LMS breakdown train. Not without some difficulty. I'm particularly interested in railway cranes. My interest in cranes and trains goes right back to my earliest memories as a toddler back in the 1950s, and members of my family worked on the railways and to a lesser extent with cranes. If you haven't followed my previous videos, you could check out previous parts on this subject. Part 123 was a general introduction re-railway cranes and featured 3 OO gauge crane models that I had at the time. In part 125 I restored an old Hornby Dublo model of a breakdown crane, and in parts 132 and 133 I unboxed, reviewed and operated the most detailed OO gauge model of a railway breakdown crane currently available, Bachmann's model of a Ransomes and Rapier 45-ton crane. That Bachmann crane featured again in part 141 when I built a Daypole kit of a Lancashire and Yorkshire 040 Pug loco specifically to serve as a lightweight loco load that I could lift with my model cranes. So I was coming from that background and having those previously shown crane models when I saw this listing on eBay UK. Actually, at first glance, I thought this was a listing for the Bachmann Ransomes and Rapier crane model. And I was initially tipped that this wasn't so by the price. It was too cheap to be the Bachmann model. That's a pricey item. £249.95 is the current RRP, although I was able to pick up mine from Hatton's for just over £200, including the shipping to myself in Canada. This listing was priced at £85 plus postage and import duty in my case, and the listing included a couple of other items in addition to the crane, so clearly not the Bachmann model. On the other hand, the pictures didn't look like any other crane model I was aware of, and this being an area of particular interest to me, I'm pretty well aware of what's out there. When I looked more closely into the listing, it became apparent that this was something that an individual modeller had gone to considerable trouble to create, starting, for the crane itself, from Hornby's standard plastic operating model of a 75-ton steam breakdown crane, of which I have a couple of examples. Now, that Hornby model doesn't look too bad from a distance, but it's not really a very accurate model in many ways. Perhaps most obviously the rigging of the jib is nothing like what a real crane of this sort of size would have. Here's the Bachmann model on my Hornby layout. Now that's a fairly accurate model of how a large steam railway crane would be rigged. Specifically, this model is based on 45-ton cranes from Ransomes and Rapier that were used by the GWR and SR and subsequently by British Railways after nationalisation. The LMS also used very similar cranes. The model sold by Hornby does operate and can actually be used to lift loads, as seen here. The Bachmann model is also fully operable, with jib and hook being raised and lowered using a tool inserted into the back of the crane body to turn the cranks. So what exactly was going on with this item listed on eBay? It was essentially the Hornby model, but it had been repainted and given special markings, and moreover clearly a lot of work had been done to modify the rigging, at least of the jib. The listing included this picture of the crane from the top. All of those gears and pulleys have been added by the modeller doing the modification. Outside steam cylinders have also been added. Those are only represented by some rather vague, shallow moulding on the original Hornby model. Now, the description with the listing did caution that this was not an operating model so far as raising and lowering the jib and hook went. The modeler went for a much more accurate appearance, but wasn't able to make all of that rigging and machinery actually work for lifting loads. The main listing picture showed the crane like this, with its associated load-relieving bogies and match truck, all of which came with the original Hornby crane model, and also with a four-wheeled tool van, which was an additional item quite separate from the Hornby crane model. The crane and its associated vehicles were marked, as in British Railways operations, with the Seamuth Motive Power Depot. This was a negative for me, as in WWII model pre-World War II LMS operations, especially in the British Midlands, so if I bought this set I was going to need to change the markings. There was one additional picture with the listing, seen here, which showed another piece of rolling stock, a corridor coach, marked as a Seamuth Motive Power breakdown van. I did take a moment to weigh the pros and cons for me of purchasing this item. It wasn't going to be an operating crane so far as lifting loads went, and I was going to have to do some work changing the markings, which might be quite tricky. On the other hand, it was an interesting and indeed unique item representing a full breakdown train apart from the loco, something of particular interest to me. So I went ahead and clicked buy it now. And here is what I got when I unpacked the package after it arrived. Everything was very well wrapped in tissue paper and bubble wrap, but here are the pieces after I extracted them. The set comprised the crane with its load-relieving bogies and match truck, modified from the Hornby model, and two other pieces of rolling stock, the tool van and the breakdown coach. Here's a close-up of the side of the crane body. The rectangular holes in the base are where the L-shaped supporting beam pieces could be inserted into the Hornby model to support it when turning and lifting. This model didn't come with those L-shaped supporting beam pieces, but the holes for fitting them had been left unmodified, and you can see the original red colour of the Hornby model inside those holes in this flash picture. Here's the whole set railed up on my testing track. And here from the other end, showing the crane better. Here's a close-up showing the modified rigging, gears, etc. The chimney piece, which would have been fitted on over the hole in the roof at right, has been discarded for some reason, or perhaps just lost. Overall, the crane looks more realistic than anything else available in OO gauge other than the Bachmann model. Adding the cylinders to the sides definitely makes the model look more real. The paintwork has also been nicely done. The picking out of the ladders and operating cocks definitely enhances the appearance. The crane looks quite good from all angles, although of course some aspects still retain the limitations of the Hornby original. The load-relieving bogies, for example, are pretty basically modelled. I'm not quite sure what the other two pieces of rolling stock were based on, but obviously they'd been custom finished. They may even have been kit-built items, as the couplings, for example, were just glued onto the ends of the bogies. Both pieces were painted in this reddish-brown colour and marked as belonging to the Seamuth Motive Power Depot. Here's the marking on the coach as it came. And here's a close-up of the marking on the side of the crane body. I was particularly concerned about these markings, as I wanted to change them. I'm not at all clear why this model was marked as belonging to the Seamuth Motive Power Depot. So far as I can determine, there never was any such depot under British Railways. And indeed, there is no place called Seamuth anywhere in the UK, so far as I can tell. There are a couple of buildings with the name, such as Seamuth Lodge and Seamuth Cottage, both of which are in southern Wales, as it happens. One possible clue is that it seems that Hornby magazine had a layout at some point in time that used the name Seamuth, so perhaps this model was somehow associated with that layout, or inspired by it. I really don't know. If you can enlighten me in any way regarding the Seamuth Motive Power Depot, please do post in the comments below. I got the crane itself and the tool van and the coach onto my workbench so that I could work on the markings. I certainly didn't want things marked as British Railways, and I didn't really want to keep the Seamouth name. Apparently there is no such place, but if there were, from the name, it would presumably be on the coast, whereas my focus is on the Midlands. The first thing that I tried from removing the decals was Microset. Microset is excellent for removing decals so long as no kind of overcoat has been applied over the decals. In this case, Microset made no impression at all, as seen here, indicating that an overcoat had indeed been applied over the decals. I can't really complain about this. I always put an overcoat over decals myself, as it protects the decals and generally enhances the appearance. I had, of course, no way of knowing what kind of overcoat had been used. I tried some isopropyl alcohol. This did seem to maybe soften things a bit, but not all that well. Here I'm trying to remove the Seamouth name from the coach using IPA and a sharp knife. This really didn't go too well, as I damaged the paintwork quite badly in removing the decals. I mixed up some paint, trying to match the colour on the tool van and the coach by combining crimson with some brown and black. Unfortunately, and not surprisingly, I couldn't really get a perfect match. I had done the markings on the van and the coach first, as being less obvious and critical than the markings on the crane itself. Given how badly things had gone with the van and the coach, I was rather dreading working on the crane. I tried the IPA again first, but it really seemed to make no impression, leaving the overcoat surface basically undisturbed. I tried mineral spirits as well, with no more success. Then I had a thought. I had some methyl hydrate, not by my workbench, but under the bathroom sink. I can't even remember why I bought it, but it's also a strong solvent, so I decided that I really had nothing to lose by giving it a try. Here you can see my initial results with the methyl hydrate. It did indeed seem to dissolve the top coat and loosen the decals, without removing the base layer of grey paint. In fact, the results of using the methyl hydrate were fairly similar to how Microset will remove uncoated decals. The surface certainly did look rather messy after removing the decals, but generally this was more successful than my attempts with the other rolling stock. I went to work on the other side of the crane body, as both sides had these markings. You can see here how the methyl hydrate is softening the top coat and the decals. It appeared that the decals had been applied in multiple layers, so quite a bit of careful picking was required to remove everything. Here's that side with all of the decals gone. Pretty blotchy, but it could certainly have been worse. I did make a little hole in the grey paint on one side. Oddly enough, this showed black, although it seemed that the underlying plastic was red. Here are all of the items after my attempts to remove decals and touch up the paint. Now I wanted to think about adding some markings to make the crane more appropriate for LMS operation. I dug around for pictures of LMS cranes in their original configuration. Not easy to find. Here's a picture of an LMS crane upon delivery in the 1930s. So far as I can see, the only actual LMS markings of any size are on the side of the match truck. This is an ex-LMS Ransomes and Rapier crane in its days with British Railways at the Rugby Motive Power Depot. The lettered markings here were not relevant to me, but it was interesting to see how the various plates on the crane were placed, and these would be original. Here's an old newspaper picture of an LMS crane working at an accident site. This is actually a Cowan's or a Craven crane, I believe, rather than one made by Ransomes and Rapier, but again it has the same kind of informational plate on the side of the crane body. And here's a picture of an LMS crane which was definitely made by Craven. For some reason the LMS spread their orders for these cranes across the three main builders, Ransomes and Rapier, Cowan's and Craven. This crane again has an informational plate on the side of the body and is marked LMS on the side of the match truck. Finally, here's a picture of an LMS Ransoms and Rapier crane with its match truck, but without its load-relieving bogies. This would actually be the same crane that was seen in the Rugby MP picture, and this crane is now preserved on the Nene Valley Railway near Peterborough. Again, note the various plates on the crane, although not on this side of the main body, and the small LMS marking on the match truck. These etched plates came with the Bachmann crane model. There was good quality printing on the Bachmann model representing all of these plates, but the etched versions were supplied to be optionally mounted. I hadn't fitted them to the Bachmann model as the printed versions looked quite good. Now I thought that I might use some of these plates to enhance this new model. I applied some Future over the sides of the crane body to try to smooth over the rather blotchy surface. Future is a kind of glossy, transparent acrylic finish. Future is sold as floor polish, but it's long been used by modelers to provide a smooth surface under and/or over decals. I wanted to put LMS letters on the side of the match truck. I used HMRS press-fix decals for LMS letters of an appropriate size. I put these on both sides of the match truck. I subsequently painted over these decals with a little Future to protect them. I put the largest etched information plate on the left side of the crane body, hiding the place where the paint had been removed. You can see the original red colour underneath the base here. I'm rather mystified as to why the wheels have green plastic centres with one set different from the others. Here's a close-up of that plate on the side of the crane, entirely appropriate for a 45-ton Ransoms and Rapier crane, although the match truck is more in the style of Cowans or Craven. I put other small plates on the side of the crane, and I used methyl hydrate again to remove the decals in the centre of the lower body. Then I put another small plate into one of those locations. Again, these plates seemed quite appropriate for the kind of crane I was trying to pass this as. So there's the crane and its associated trucks on my workbench after my attempts to remark it. I took the set back up and tried it on the test track again. I put some Future on the sides of the van and the coach as well in an attempt to make my paint repairs less obvious. Here's the crane with its new markings on the test track. I wanted to rail up the set as a breakdown train for some running on my Hornby layout. I looked for pictures of real breakdown trains from the period to get some idea as how things should go. Again, not easy to find such pictures, but here's a picture of a real breakdown train. Note that the crane is coupled immediately behind the loco with its jib running forward, and a coach and vans too in this case are coupled behind. So I coupled this setup on my Hornby layout in basically that way. Here are the coach and the tool vans sitting across my level crossing. I'm afraid you can still see where I repaired the paintwork, but overall I don't think that the appearance is too bad. Here's the crane with its new markings all railed up and ready to run. Again, in a flash close-up, some flaws are visible, but I don't think that they'll be at all obvious when running. I could, of course, easily put some black paint into those holes in the chassis. Running as a train is, as noted, all that this set is good for. The gears and rigging are glued in place and so immobile, so there's no way that the spools can be turned to lift the jib or the hook. The hook is in fact not properly mounted at all, being simply suspended from a single thread, whereas in reality the hook would have had pulleys in its head and would have been suspended by 4 cables, 2 going to pulleys on each side. But since the jib can't be raised, and so the hook is just going to be seen sitting on the match truck underneath the jib, I guess the details of the hook mounting don't really matter so much. The Bachmann model does have the hook properly mounted with pulleys and 4 cables. Here's that breakdown train going round the far end of my Hornby layout. I used a Bachmann model of a Midland 1F tank loco to pull the train, as this loco happened to be railed on the track after my previous train running. Here's the 1F loco with the crane coupled behind it. And here's the whole breakdown train. The crane model clearly doesn't rival the one made by Bachmann, but it is the nicest looking crane model that I have apart from that expensive Bachmann item, so I'm generally quite happy that I made this purchase. Now let's finish with a little running video of this breakdown train. So let's just try to see some running video of this breakdown train. As the Bachmann Midland 1F tank loco. There's the match truck with the end of the jib on it and the front load relieving bogie, and then the main body of the crane, the back load relieving bogie, the breakdown coach, and at the back the tool van. There we go. So there's the whole breakdown train. Now I'm kneeling down to get the picture at this angle. Ow, so I'm going to have rather creaky knees now. I'm going to try and stand up and pick up the remote controller from the Morley, the handheld controller, so we can actually start off running this train. Oh, I don't know what speed we're going to run it. There we go. 40, 45, maybe a little more than that. Almost 50% power. Well, it's a bit of a load to pull, actually, this train. The axles are perhaps not the freest running, so it's a little bit of a load for the loco. This is basically the, for all its modification, in many ways it's the Hornby crane, and so its jib still basically behaves on the jib truck pretty much the same way as the Hornby cranes do it. It sits on the jib truck there and sort of moves from side to side as the train goes round the corner, but it's stopped from falling off the end because there are sort of blocks on the end of the beam there on the match truck, and the body of the crane itself pivots somewhat as the crane goes round the corner. A bit too whoops. Sorry. Pause, zoom, see how the body of the crane pivots as it goes round the corner, and then of course it'll straighten out as it goes along. Fortunately this loco has pretty good pickups, famous last words, but it has generally shown itself to have pretty good pickups, this loco, so even though it's pulling a fair load and dragging it, it's still running consistently. See how the body of the crane turns as the train goes round the corner there. Of course you wouldn't get the curves that sharp on a real railway, but it makes quite a handsome looking breakdown train, and really, well, that's all it's going to do, act as a running train like this, because this particular crane doesn't actually operate for lifting things, unlike most of my other, pretty much all of my other model cranes. Well, I guess that's probably about it, really. Stop in there and go in once more for a little zoom. I think we ended up making that crane look quite nice.